Testing, testing. Welcome to another episode of the VOX podcast. Hi, Jeremy. How are you doing? Welcome to the VOX podcast. And thank you, Diane, to be our co-host as usual. Jeremy, this is a different episode compared to what we have shot before, because generally we talk to existing founders or CEO of startups that are in the middle of the race for fundraising. They are looking for a opportunity to share what they are doing with the potential investor that they find in our podcast. Here we have a different type of podcast. First of all, because it's a video podcast that is shared starting on YouTube, but then on all the other podcast platforms. But it's the first time that actually we interview someone that have done an exit on the startup that has incorporated. And this one I think is quite interesting because you are Singaporean, but you have founded your startups in the US, and then you exited, and then you moved back to Singapore. So I really like you to give an overview of how the experience was, why you went to the US. How do you come up with the idea? How difficult it was to incorporate over there? And obviously how you are enjoying now your time away from the startup.
That's so many questions. Where do we begin? I always start first, grew up here in Singapore, and then went on to, study at UC Berkeley after finishing my national service, 2 years of military service as an infantry commander. UC Berkeley, ton of fun in the US. To be honest, I kind of expected San Francisco to be warmer, and I realized that I've been watching too much Hollywood movies set in Los Angeles, right? But San Francisco was great, ton of exposure, and I ended up studying economics and business, and my honors thesis was on how technology rates are adopted at different speeds across the world. So it was just kind of interesting time to be in 2008 to 2011, and kind of got my first taste about at the time Google and Facebook was starting to grow, and I think that was my first kind of exposure to like the tech industry. And I remember then working at a Temasek-backed startup in China as an intern, and that opened up my eyes to what fast growth really looks like. Really interesting experience. And then went on to work as a consultant at Bain across Southeast Asia, based out of Singapore, where I work a lot with multiple clients from small to large, market turnarounds to acquisition, and just love working with the people, great culture. And then I went on to leave and bootstrap my first company, Conjunct Consulting, as the president and co-founder of it. And I co-founded it with my first co-founder, who was my old army buddy in national service. So we dug trenches together. We cracked jokes in the middle of monsoon rain in the jungle. We sang songs while marching in the past midnight. So great experience, and we bootstrapped that to cash flow profitability and a thriving social impact consultancy platform, and hired my replacement eventually, and so that I could leave and exit and go to Harvard Business School to do my MBA. And that was a great experience where, again, I was very focused on technology and entrepreneurship and looking at, two things. I think the first part, of course, was exploring new opportunities and spaces that I was passionate about. And the second was also really focusing on what it meant to be a founder and a CEO of a company. And that was a tremendous experience. And while I was there, I was funded by Harvard and MIT to explore new ideas out of their co-working spaces and innovation programs. And eventually, long story short, came in looking at, mental health issues, eventually pivoted to solving the root of that problem for us in demo. And, the rest is history. If you want, I'm happy to talk about the product market fit process and the rest of the company, but now, yeah.
The startup at the time was CozyKin, right?
Yeah.
How did it came about? How did you come up with the idea, and how did you manage to implement the idea? And who was your co-founder at that point?
Yeah, so when we started out, we were really looking at actually mental wellness and healthcare. And so we were really passionate about looking and saying how we could lower, the stress for people. And what was that process was we came to understand that there were certain demographics that were had a more tough time on average. So we kind of narrowed it down. So like first demographic being, college students going through transition, often had, mental health wellness issues. The second category would be those exposed to traumatic situations. So for example, grief or first responders would be another category. And the third category that we saw was that there were new moms had a large prevalence of postpartum depression. And so we eventually zoomed in on new mothers to explore what was really going on with them. And it came up in user interview after user interview that the lack of childcare and the inability to go back to work with peace of mind was a big driver for their stress and caused a lot of difficult family decisions. And that's how we ended up really kind of like kicking off that next set of conversations internally, which was like, can we solve the root of this problem rather than tackling the symptoms of this? And so we pivoted into solving that, and we explored a bunch of different solutions around a childcare stack. And we came up with a sharing economy approach where we would basically provide decentralized childcare. And we basically pioneered what we now call learning pods in the pandemic years. But we created learning pods working our private homes for young children in Boston and New York. And we grew and grew.
Jeremy, thanks. That's interesting that you started off with mental health and then, honed in and kept going, asking the why, and kept going deeper into decentralized, childcare. Can you tell us a bit more about the solution that you have? Is there tech involved? How did you, decentralize childcare in general?
Yeah, I think the most important thing that we came to understand was that, parents and new parents really struggled with feeling like there was highly trusted care that made sense for the modern lifestyle, right? And I think there's so many preschools in the States that just have a morning program or an afternoon program, and every parent's kind of like, that makes no sense, right? I don't work for half the day, right? And there was also a huge dynamic around the costing and structure as well. And so what we were able to do was, I think we did things differently by decentralizing childcare and saying, we're not really looking to build these like, brick and mortar, really expensive daycares that cost $1 million to build and are expensive to run and, honestly, are not really fitting with the requirements of what parents want to have in terms of environment, especially for young children, infants and toddlers. So we really looked at, kind of like flipping the script on this one and saying, these parents already are, converting their living rooms and their bedrooms into these beautiful nurseries and playrooms for their own children. They're already inviting friends for play dates. It's not going to take much. What we do need is we need a professional caregiver to come in and teacher to really transform that space from just a sporadic play space into a great place for socialization, for learning, and for childcare to happen. And so we saw the technology was instrumental in 3 different ways. The first was really in sourcing and activating the local parent networks in the various communities. The truth is there are lots of parents who are having kids at any one time, maybe not in your specific network of social friends and peers, which may be all across the world, but at the neighborhood level, there are often many mothers and many local mother groups that need childcare and are looking for more community. But the second was also the matching component where we were able to match parents that live close to each other. And the vast majority of our learning pods were within 10 minutes of commute, right? Be that walking or cycling or driving, depending on the neighborhood. And then the third, of course, was the management of care, right? So we looked at making sure that every child would not only have great care, but that our safety standards continue to be at the highest bar possible, while also making sure to maximize the individual potential of each child using a Montessori pedagogy. And that was really important for everybody at the company. That's what we were passionate about as people who were either veterans of childcare industry that wanted a more tech-forward way of doing things, and also you meant it for the people in technology and startup experienced folks who were experiencing the pains of being a new parent. So that was a big mission that inspired all of us.
Oh, that's great. Can we talk a bit more about if I am a parent, do I, and I imagine that it's location specific. Is it mainly around Boston area? Was the technology available elsewhere or community, I guess?
Yeah, it was available in Boston and New York. And basically what we were able to do was, after acquisition, kind of expand that pod structure to our acquirer and work at multiple different local neighborhoods as a result as well. So, and it was quite an experience because of, the pandemic year and everything. We saw that a lot of traditional childcare facilities also had to close. And so we worked quite closely with the regulators in multiple states in the States to not only in the short term grant us, what they call, emergency waivers for this form of childcare, but also to kind of encourage and promote this form of childcare, because the truth is, while everyone is stuck at home, children still need care, right? They still need learning, they still need inspiration, they still need to socialize. And, parents also too need some help, around the home to at least feel the assurance that the child is, still hitting the milestones, but also giving them some space to be, in their professional lives as well. And so that's been an interesting experience for sure. And I think it's also been great to see the inspiration of so many other childcare companies in the States of learning pods, right? So now we see learning pods or home pods of not just infants and toddlers, which we focus on, but also for like preschoolers and for elementary school and after school. So it's been quite the experience to see that growth, and that's only been possible if you think about it, because the internet has let us reforge that relationship at a community level, at the neighborhood level, that has been missing for, I would say, at least a couple dozen years.
Can we add some pinpoint in terms of timeline? When did you start it, and when you got your first round of funding, when you started toying with the idea of exiting, and when you actually exit?
Yeah, so we started out in 2016, the summer, and that's when we were exploring how we could solve this problem for new mothers. And it honestly took us about 1.5 years before we kind of like really figure out not just the product market fit, but how to go to market, our right teaming, etc. And then that's when we raised our seed round. And then after that, 1 year later, we raised our Series A, and then another year and a bit, and then we went off and was acquired by Higher Ground. So that was quite the experience for everybody in the team. And it's been interesting to see not just the education side of things, but also the dynamics of the whole education industry during this 2020.
In terms of first seed round, I'm curious, who believed in the idea, who backed you and allowed you to move forward? I'm curious if it's a strategic investor that came in, or it was just a pure capital investment, and whether you were able to forge the vision independently, or were you influenced by the investor that came in on changing your strategy and having to adapt to a new vision, let's say?
I would say that our first VC was a professional C-stage expert VC, and tremendous amount of support and help, where I think it was less about a focus of changing focus or strategy, but more about distilling down what was making us finally kind of like take off, and have that, you know, viral word of mouth at the community level. And so that was a really interesting experience, from getting from, you know, point A to point B. And sometimes it helps that someone else kind of like sit next to the table with you and say, oh, these were the engines that brought you from point A to point B. Because, you know, when you're in it day to day, it can be and feel very messy. But I think looking back, sometimes the journey makes a lot more sense than you might have expected.
Jeremy, I have a question about just taking a few steps back, you know, trying to understand the customer journey here. So, you know, if I were a parent living in Boston and whatnot, and I'm looking for, I like how, you know, you mentioned about the, your value prop seems to be balancing, you know, this whole like trust or quality, you know, in a good caretaker, plus, you know, price wise, you know, not too crazy. So how would I, you know, how would I interact with CozyKin, you know, to get your services?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, if the most classic journey would be if you were expecting a child in trimester 1, trimester 2, you would probably start transitioning your journey from, you know, your professional community to forging a new parent community, you know, your friends who are, you know, parents, and, you know, your local neighborhood, and you would go to parenting classes, and prenatal classes, and talking to the OB. And as you met these parents, I think what you have seen is that you have seen other parents using CozyKin services, ranging from, you know, short-term care to local neighborhood care, right? And, you know, you would then, as a result, just sign up with CozyKin to get matched with another parent, right? And so that was, you know, by trimester 2, trimester 3, if you put down a deposit of CozyKin, you would have the peace of mind that your childcare needs at the 3-month or 6-month mark would already be solved, which was this industry leading, right? Because the traditional journey for most parents would have been the other way around, right? Which would have been, you know, give birth to the child, wait 3 to 6 months, and then start visiting schools desperately and, you know, knocking doors for maybe a slot. And if you fail to do that, you wouldn't be able to go back to work because there's no one else to take care of the kid, right? And so I think that was a really big part of the customer journey, was just like hearing about us first in trimester 1, trimester 2, trimester 3, your friends, and being to offer you the peace of mind that you would be able to reserve childcare in advance for your expected return date to work. And then, of course, what would happen is that during your trimester 3 and, you know, during your first 3 months of parental leave, you have the opportunity to meet with other parents at the local neighborhood level. You know, we literally match families that live across from each other, right? And, you know, they had no idea. They were like, you know, I didn't know the other family across the street, you know, just had a child like 2 months before my child, right? You know, and, you know, it's just the kind of connections that we're making. And obviously for them, it was like a no-brainer, right? Because, you know, we can host childcare, we can take turns at each other's homes, or we can drive to a large corporate, you know, daycare 20 minutes away where we don't know anybody.
Yeah,
and I think that was just a tremendous experience for everybody, the kids especially.
Okay, so I would sign up on a platform, whether it's an app or website, and then you probably fill out some details about, you know, when the baby will be due, and I don't know, location wise. It sounds like your matching is probably done maybe by age and location, or what criteria is it matched on?
I mean, I think the biggest ones for parents would always be about, you know, the big two, like you said, exactly, would be age and location. So not necessarily parents' age, but the age of the children, as well as the location, so the distance. I think things that also matter for other people, of course, were like schedule, right? You know, so parents would often want to match and say longer schedules versus shorter schedules. That's important. And of course, thinking about the aspects around, you know, some of the softer side, you know, would be outlook on life and, you know, some of the home environment. But what we found out is that, you know, at the end of the day, being a parent really transcends everything. So what I mean by that is, and, you know, when you have a kid, you know, you have so much more affinity to anybody else who has a kid in the same year compared to, anyone else, right? Because, if you think about it, like how many people are in your professional and social network are having kids at the same time? Very few, right? So sometimes it can be a very lonely experience in your workplace, just being the one or two parents that had a kid this year. But suddenly when you enter like the parents club, right, then you're meeting hundreds of other parents who are concerned about the same things and puzzled about the same things and, struggling to figure out the right equipment and the right routines, but also hopeful about the same things, which is that the child grows up safe and healthy and wise and happy, right? And I think that's something that is one of the best parts about the entire experience, was being able to be the trusted partner for so many families, and being able to not only hear their journeys, but also hear and see their experience with their kids.
I saw that you had so much media coverage. Was that because you were the only one addressing that space, or there was other reason why? And most importantly, did the media get the story right? They understood exactly what you were trying to achieve?
Yeah, I think that we just did the work, and I think the media sat down and chatted with us and tried to explain it. I think the way that the media really looked at it was really through the prism of a childcare shortage and the barriers to access for so many families. And so I think they were looking at it more of a national and at a state level and even maybe a regional level, which was how most people would agree with, right? It's just, especially in the States, it's just difficult to get help. It's difficult to get childcare, and I think people make tremendous sacrifices that honestly don't and shouldn't be made from my perspective. But it's based on household income. It's based on the level of federal and state support and the local fabric at the community and family level. So there's a lot of interacting factors that make it, as they describe it, a childcare crisis. And I think that's really how the media rightfully looks at it and talks about it. And I think we always came in as one of the prospective solutions. And even today, I would say, we're not the only solution. There were many other companies that were also tackling this crisis in different ways, right? Ranging from parent education to caregiver and teacher education to socialization activities to, nature exploration, to, apps, to local services, to nonprofits. So I think we were just one of the many tools, I would say, that the media would, highlight and share to families.
And in this journey, did you find any obstacle in terms of regulation or any parties that was against what you were trying to do? Anyone that tried to prevent your vision to be implemented?
I think at the end of the day, it's really about, I think, the regulations and the norms. And I think everything has been built because, something has worked. And so people are trying to codify that into that, right? Which is around hygiene and safety and, location. So all those things are really important. And I think it's totally fair, and I think it's totally normal to not only expect regulation, but also I think over the long term, I think regulation is healthy, especially for industries that are important as this. What's interesting is that, of course, sometimes situations change, right? And I think what we've seen in the pandemic, for example, is that the traditional regulations around hygiene and the push towards more centralization of care, unfortunately, breaks apart in a world where there's a pandemic and there's a contagion kind of like going around, right? And unfortunately, schools are one of the vectors for this pandemic, right? And so that puts regulators and parents, and children in a tough spot, right? And teachers as well. And I think the tricky part then is, how do we, say this is the regulations that got us to here at this point. How do we articulate a future that acknowledges the current reality of where we have, while also letting us channel our desires, right? For teachers to have, living wages, right? And to be able to progress professionally, for children to grow into their full potential, for parents to be able to be their best at home and at work, right? For employers to feel that, they're able to continue operating as they need to be, right? And I think that's where, and I think I've been quite happy to see, I think everybody kind of like saying like, this is a problem that is in many ways like very fundamental to every family, regardless of your beliefs or affiliations. And so I think you see a lot of robust conversations, especially at the local level, because, it just needs to get solved, right? Otherwise, things can't happen. Like, people can't go back to work if there's no childcare, because who else is going to take care of the children? But, who's going to take care of the children if it's not going to be a safe environment, right, for everybody? And I think that's where the conversations are, I think, healthy and robust at a local level. And I think the tricky part as we kind of goes up the chain a little bit is that then the language tends to get a little bit more heated and simplified to the point of, like, from my perspective, being less than useful. So I think overall, I think, to recap, like, I think regulation is great overall, and I think startups benefit from regulatory action that is meant for the good of the industry on average. And I think what's interesting is when things change, what do we do, right? And I think we saw that in the States where, childcare and education regulators stepped in to grant waivers to allow things to continue happening.
Jeremy, on the topic of COVID, have you heard back? So the company now has been acquired by High Ground Education, correct? And do you know what's going on that end? Is it because with schools being closed down? I'm not actually sure. I guess it depends on the location, but some locations have schools shut down. I can imagine that this would be really helpful. So I'm just wondering about how is it doing right now? How is it faring against COVID?
Yeah, it's going great. I think, we've been able to really extend care to many more families across many more states. And I think what's been interesting also has been to expand not just the programming from early, age segments, but also to form different types of care, right, for different levels of involvement. Some parents need full-time childcare in their homes, but other parents just want community and support for themselves to do the childcare, right? And other people who want to mix and match, right? So half is, themselves at home, and half they would like some support through like virtual classes or local neighborhood level classes. So it's interesting to see that spread of, stay home, for work, but also kind of like pushing, schooling and education down to the home level as well. And I think that's been an interesting change. And I think that what we're going to see, hopefully after the pandemic eases up and we have a vaccine, is we're probably going to see a lot more blended learning at the home and neighborhood level. And, I think the truth is the ones that are able to do all of it, right, in a way that's fluid and natural and keeps the values for children and parents and educators at heart is going to do the best. I think it's not going to be a pure brick and mortar operator that only operates large centralized corporate daycares, but neither is it going to be just a pure Zoom at home, song circle. I think it's going to be something that integrates the best of both worlds.
Are you still involved in the management or in the ownership of the company? What's your status now?
Yeah, I left several months ago, and I've been back in Singapore, and it's been a great experience as watching the rest of the company continue to not just progress in the mission, but also push forward with that. And I continue to be a big supporter of the team and the mission. And now that I'm back in Singapore, just looking at what things also resonate with me in terms of mission.
Jeremy, can I ask what was the inspiration behind the acquisition of the maybe this partnership with Higher Ground Education? I guess it makes sense, but was wondering more about, were you looking to move on to the next thing? What made you sell off the company?
Yeah, I think Higher Ground was just a leader in Montessori education, not just at the United States level, but on a global level as well. And so we admired that team and the talent, and we saw the opportunity to take the platform and the tech that we had and the processes and to scale it out, not just from the geographies we were in, which was Boston and New York, which is great, but just a very small slice of the overall population and the overall childcare crisis that we're addressing. And we saw the opportunity to scale that out to more states and more locations. And I think that was the biggest reason for why we wanted to do it, amongst other reasons as well.
Jeremy, thank you very much. I think we are taking so much of your time, and it has been a pleasure to ask you all these questions about your success story, especially in a period of challenge for startups. Is there any other question from you, Diane, you want to ask?
Yeah, just one last question, actually. So, Jeremy, what's next?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's something I've been asking myself. I think one thing that I'm really been happy to share has been to, start and transition. I used to have a hobby of improv before the pandemic, and I've transitioned to podcasting during this pandemic. And it's been a great joy to actually share the journey of other brave founders and executives and investors. So for anybody who's interested, feel free to check out www.jeremyau.com. And that's a great place to not just hear the stories of people who are pushing the boundaries about what it means to be brave, but it also is a community of other people who are interested in learning about the ropes of how to be a better leader in these contexts. And so it's been a fun journey, and I'll continue to keep everybody posted.
Thank you very much for sharing your time and experience with us.
Thank you, Stefano.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, Jeremy.
Bye.
Nice to meet you.